primarily my stories have been children's stories. But I was introduced to Abdurrahman Ibrahima's story about 10 years ago. A friend of mine, who I've worked with for a long time, he wanted to collaborate on telling the story. Now, Abdurrahman was an African prince who was enslaved in Natchez, Mississippi for 40 years. Now, when I first heard the story, I thought, I'm not sure. But my friend, he said, no, his story is amazing. And what we did is I started reading Terry Alford's biography. Now the thing is though, as a student of history, I'm well aware that an internal bias can often come through when we look at historical figures. It does depend on who is telling the story. So when I was looking at Abdurrahman's story, the prince's story, I kept a salt shaker close by, so I took everything with a grain of salt. And what I did was I started doing my own research on Abdurrahman, on the slavery, the issue of slavery in America, and also the issue of slavery in West Africa. So I did my own research, and I've been researching it now for 10 years. And during that time, instead of getting tired of the topic of Abdurrahman, I've only gotten more interested. I am fascinated with this person. He was an impeccable character. He was an impeccable example. And I'm coming at it from a Muslim perspective, as a person who tries to practice my faith. And when I look at his example, he was an impeccable character. He established Islam in his Muslim character to the best of his ability, to the point that even Thomas Foster, his enslaver, who enslaved him for 40 years, even Thomas Foster could never say one word against the moral character of the prince. He said in the 40 years he knew him, he had never heard the prince utter a mean word. He just wasn't. He was a prime example. In fact, he was such good character that Thomas Foster refused to sell him, even when John Coates Cox was willing to pay twice his value of $1,000 that John Coates Cox actually didn't have. So when I looked at his story is the story of West Africa. In West Africa, where Abdurrahman came from, it was an incredible society, very educated. There were two universities, one in Timbuktu and Jenne, that Abdurrahman attended. From a very young age, he showed a propensity for education. So his father, King Sori, sent him to these educational institutions, even while King Sori was trying to establish the kingdom of Futajalan. He was under so much pressure from neighboring tribes that were trying to infiltrate. And the way slavery happened in West Africa was nothing like the institution that occurred in America. In America, basically, slavery became a racial institution where the Americans enslaved an entire race, and they continue to do so. Whereas in West Africa, slavery was primarily an economic institution. And there are reasons that I delve into in the novel that I'm working on. I've been working on this novel for 10 years, and I finally got the funding to come down here to Natchez. I am from Toronto, Canada. It took basically a full day to get down here to Natchez, and I feel like I've been stalking Natchez because I've been looking at everything online in terms of this history of Natchez, looking at all the antebellum houses that are kind of ridiculous because they seldom really talk about how the enslaved were the ones who set up these magnificent architecture and everything. So it's like I've been stalking Natchez, and being down here, it's surreal because I've seen so much of it. I've even taken the tour of this African American museum online. So being here in person is like my research come to life. It's surreal for me. And this is such an amazing opportunity for me to consolidate my research into Abdurrahman. Now the project I'm working on is an adult historical novel. I finished the first draft. It came in at 120,000 words, which is about 600 pages. And I kept trying to trim it down because even for an adult novel, that's pretty long. But I couldn't. I was cutting and cutting, and I thought, oh, but this is so interesting. Abdurrahman's story it's like a mega blockbuster, and everything actually happened. And in writing his story, what I'm actually trying to show is a broader picture. His biography is already done. Now, reading Terry Alford's biography, like I said, I read it with a grain of salt. And I looked at the fact that he wrote it in the 70s. This book has its 30th anniversary. It's been around for a while. And over the years, Abdurrahman's story has only been, it just keeps getting bigger and more well known. But it's not well known enough. People need to know this amazing story of this amazing gentleman. And what I want to do in my work is look at it from a broader perspective. What I realized is that in West Africa, like I said, the institution of slavery was nothing like what it is here. In fact, Thomas Clarkson, who was a British deacon, he was a deacon, a man of faith. He was interested in what was happening in West Africa, and what he did was he interviewed a gentleman named Monsieur Villeneuve, and in this he created letters, and this was it was in 1790 that he did this, and in 1788 was when Abdurrahman came to Natchez. So this is all of the time period, and so the research that I've gone into researches what slavery was like in West Africa according to Thomas Clarkson's very objective, I must say, his very objective interviews of people, these French soldiers that were in West Africa collecting enslaved people and purchasing these people to be sent to the Americas. So the research that I've been doing, like I said, I've been doing it for about 10 years. Coming here to the African American Museum is absolutely critical to my research. And especially in terms of speaking to people like Bobby Dennis, Beverly Adams, and the African contingent of the descendants of Thomas Foster, James Foster, the Fosters, as well as Abdurrahman. Because I feel like their side of the story has gotten short shrift. In fact, I was telling my agent, because when I sent my first draft to my agent, I told him, I said, I tried to cut it down, but I couldn't get it smaller than 112,000 words. My agent, he worked at HarperCollins on the Book of Negroes by Lawrence Hill. And he said to me, he said, no, Rukhsane, this is an epic saga, go big. So he told me to actually indulge my penchant of really telling this story properly. So I am going into the biographies of John Quincy Adams, Andrew Jackson, who tried to buy Abdurrahman at one point, and who came to the Natchez area because he was doing all kinds of stuff. And so I'm actually delving into the broader story behind it, because I want to get past the idea that, of course, slavery equals bad, okay? But I want to get to the cultural paradigm, the way a culture, the way a people who have fundamental values can talk themselves into doing something as heinous as enslaving people and not giving them a chance to get out of it, which is basically what happened in America. So that's basically why I am here and why I appreciate the existence of this African American Museum in Natchez.